Vanguard Live. I am Precious Chukudi. We begin with the front pages of the papers this morning. Starting off with Vanguard. Vanguard is leading with recall of ambassadors. Envoys stranded as federal government foot drags on implementation. The writer says no machinery in motion for Envoys return. That's coming from sources. It says ambassador yet to receive AIE cash backings. I won't return without getting my entitlement. Envoy insists. Overzealous politician pressuring, hurting the process, and that's coming from Ambassador Keshi. Notes they have destroyed the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Also on page 8, Tinubu appointed Fela Durotoye, four others in his media team. WIKE, EU report, inaccurate reflection of 2023 polls. So you can read one on page 9. And on page 25, Israel intensifies the attack, enforces total blockade of Gaza. The writer says cuts power supply, food, fuel, drug. Hamas threatens to kill hostages. Shiites back Palestinians. On page 30, sports, Osimhen's coach at Napoli faces sack. On page 9, we'll break jinx of non-harmonization of database in Nigeria, and that's coming from the Interior Minister. Diphtheria, Yobe records 117 deaths, 1,796 suspected cases. And the stories above, we have a Warri concert, Davido, organizers at war over non-appearances. And on page 8, Jackpa, federal government okays engagement of retired health workers on contract basis. Petrol subsidy not back, and that's coming from KYARI, NNPCL CEO. And lastly, on the front page of Vanguard, we have no threat to financial stability, says CBN. All right, let's have a look at the Nation newspaper. The Nation is leading with Tinubu. I am focused on lifting Nigeria to greatness. Right, it says SGF briefs president. There is stability under APC government, says Envoy. Israel lays siege to Gaza. 2.3 million to vote in Liberia poll. Banks in 400 billion naira recapitalization drive at stock markets. And we have a World Bank economy incomplete without prosperous Africa. And you can read more on page 4. Stories above, no return to petrol subsidy, says NNPCL will export fuel next year. Christmas Day killer cop to die by hanging. 3,298 on death row. And last year in front page of the Nation, we have Kiamo. Airlines must pay compensation for flight delays. All right, let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with scarcity of diagnostic services cripples cancer care in Southeast states. You can read more on that story on page 6. We can also see an infographic showing 22 million residents of Southeast have limited cancer diagnostics machine in public tertiary facility. You can check more on that on page 3. Shiite PFN differs as Hamas-Israel conflict drags into third day. Marketers grown 6 subsidized FX as federal government offers 90 import licenses. And that's how we can take on the front page of the Guardian. Let's take a look at the Punch newspaper. The Punch is leading with federal government denies subsidy return, more fuel stations shut. The writer says NNPCL blames pocket of fuel queues on road delays. 25 refinery license idle over subsidy, says KYARI. And of course, you can see a photo story showing the slain lawyer, Lagos NBA welcomes death sentence for killer cop. And on pages 4 and 5, concerns as commercial sex workers invade Lagos mall, lure men. And on page 30, we have a domestic airline demands a jet fuel import license. Forex stories above, we have 4 consortia to fix dilapidated pipelines. Israel-Hamas conflict, federal government warns pilgrims against illegal trips. Lagos suspends airlifting. 310 pilgrims evacuated from Jordan. Death toll near 1,500. And lastly, on the front page of the Punch newspaper, Ayedatiwa drops a suit against the Ondo Assembly. Akeredolu, you can read more on page 8. And that's all we can take on the front pages of the papers this morning. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. If you're just joining us here today in the news on Vanguard Live, I am Precious Chikudi. Joining me to talk about some of the stories on the front pages of the papers this morning is Mr. Dayo Akintobi, publisher of Ikeja Today, Ikeja Today, and Lekki Today. It's good to have you join me this morning, sir.
Always a pleasure to be here. Good morning to all our viewers.
Yeah. All right, let's delve in. And of course, it's 5 weeks after the president recalled the ambassadors. It seems that the federal government appears to have backtracked on the policy, foiling speculation that government may have given them some months extension. Although sources at the Ministry of Affairs, Foreign Affairs, has said that there is no going back on the recall. What's your take?
Yeah, this is a very confusing situation because officially they've been recalled, but the tools, the resources that they need to do the transfer back to the country have not been provided for them. In other words, there's some sort of arrangement that's made for their passage, for their handing over the money that they will use to transfer themselves back to the home country, the things they need to do to wrap up their affairs in the countries they are visiting. All those things require some sort of protocol. There's some document, an ESTA code, that is generally provided several weeks before. Remember, the problem is there's an October 31 deadline for them to all have returned. There are about 300 of them. There's an October 31 deadline by which they're supposed to have vacated their posts, their duty posts, and have returned to their home country. So today is already October 10th, which means it's just 3 weeks away to the deadline for them to have reported back to the ministry at home. And up to now, they've not received the money, they've not received the authorization, they've not received the material that they need to use to hand over completely and vacate their duty posts. So that, of course, begins to raise eyebrows that is it really feasible that we can expect about October 31 they'll all be done, when 3 weeks to the date they've not received the material with which they need to do the relocation. So that has led to speculation. But a ministry official came out yesterday to say, because people have been speculating, of course, it's giving grounds to speculation that perhaps they've extended their tenure by another month or two, is why there seems to be no rush to give them what they need to complete the move. But the federal ministry, foreign affairs ministry official yesterday said there's no going back, there's no backtracking. That's in line with the renewed hope agenda of the president. He wants to revamp all our foreign missions. He wants to restructure them for better efficiency, for better diplomacy, and that starts with changing the officials. So there's no going back on that policy. But we don't know how it's going to be achieved when 3 weeks to the deadline date, they've not received the money, particularly the money by which, because I mean, they all have to fly home. Some of them are with their families. They have luggage. They have things to cargo home. They've been there for several years. So it's not like they can just they can't trek to Nigeria from their foreign postings. They can't trek. They have to be adequately mobilized to make the move, and that has not happened. So that's the problem.
All right, moving on. Of course, the NNPCL has debunked reports that the government still pays a subsidy on petroleum products, and said that subsidies almost bankrupt the NNPC, and it also promoted corruption. How do you react to this, especially because there's been so much speculation as to if government is truly paying subsidy, looking at the facts on ground?
Yeah, well, you see, it's really confusing. And I listened to KYARI yesterday, the MD of NNPC, and I came out of that briefing confused, because the truth is, and it's available for anybody to see. You go on Google, you will see it. As of yesterday, the market price for Brent crude, a barrel, is $98. So even forgetting about the parallel market exchange rate, even if you exchange at the official rate of, I think it's 700 and something, is what CBN is quoting. By the time you convert what the market rate for crude is today, by the time you look at the cost of refining, the landed cost of bringing it, the paying for shipment, all that, roughly, before you even put profits, roughly a liter of petrol on the open market is about 700 and something naira. By the time you do compute the numbers don't lie. By the time you take the $98 per barrel and you convert the barrel into refined liters and you add all the costs, The market price for now is in the high 700s, but yet at the pump we are still paying 500, high five. I think in Lagos is 580. I think in Abuja is 604. Although some people say in Lagos they're buying 600. So that gap between what the market rate is and what we are paying at the pump, there is a difference, almost 200 naira. There's a difference of 100 plus naira per liquidment. I can't see where's, is it the marketer that will pay, the person who is in business for profit? Who is paying it? Somebody is paying it. For us to be getting 580 at the pump. Somebody is paying the difference, the shortage. And it can only be government. So probably politically, they don't want to admit, because remember the whole hoopla on the first day of inauguration, subsidy is gone. Then the government gets into office and sees maybe it's not that easy, maybe it's not that straightforward, especially when labor now bears its fangs. They have to negotiate with labor to get labor to pipe down on this issue of general strike and all that. Obviously, there's already hardship in the land, so they can't allow petrol prices to float freely, because if it's floating freely, we are paying close to 800 per litre. So government is still intervening, but it looks like it might be embarrassing to admit it after all the hoopla they made about the fact that subsidy is gone. So it might be egg on their faces to admit that, oh, we were wrong. We now have to continue to subsidize. So by whatever name they call it, they probably won't call it subsidy anymore. I don't know what they will call it. But the bottom line is government is intervening in fuel price. It has no choice. It has to do that. And that's what's happening. Otherwise, how is the shortfall being made up? So I was listening to KYARI yesterday. I was just laughing that, well, maybe this one thinks everybody is a dummy, and maybe he just thinks he can tell us anything. But numbers don't lie, and Google is there for everybody. Brent crude yesterday, $98 per barrel. Do the math yourself. So it's clear to me that government is intervening in the price of fuel somehow, because obviously there's hardship in the land. If all of a sudden now, in spite of how difficult things are, petrol price were to go up again, you can imagine what would happen to the average Nigerian in terms of survival. So I believe that something is going on there that is not too clear to us. But let's continue to watch, because there have also been instances where the price of the pump has fluctuated. Apparently, it's been dilly-dallying here and there. KYARI yesterday was saying, oh, the difference at the pump is 2 or 3 naira, and maybe the marketers are doing it to attract customers and are reducing price for competition. But 1 naira per litre is a lot of money to marketers. They are not going to give it away like that. So I believe government has a hand in this.
All right. You also made mention of the fact that come 2024, Nigeria will be a net exporter of petrol. And, he also said that refineries will commence operation before the end of the year. What's your take? And why is there a constant raise of hope for our refineries? And how possible are we going to, start to export fuel in 2024?
Well, let the refineries work first. We've heard it for so long that they're trying to turn them around. They're trying to get them working. So it's too ambitious to be talking about exporting. Let them work first and let them at least meet local demand first. Because for one thing, I don't believe all 4 of them are going to come on stream at the same time. So even if they manage to get Port Harcourt up and running, get Warri up and running, they won't all start running at the same time. They won't all get up to optimal productivity levels at the same time. So they will ramp up production slowly. But let's at least satisfy local demand first before we start talking about net exporting. That sounds like a pipe dream to me. Because first of all, remember, these refineries are old, though. They are not the modern type, modular. They're not like the Dangote type with the technology that Dangote is putting. These are very old, obsolete technology. So even turning them around, they're not as efficient. They probably burn more energy. They probably cost more to run. They probably will break down more often, require more maintenance. So let's do it slowly. There's no rush. These things have been out of commission for so many years now that most people have lost hope. I think it was a mistake for Nigeria to have reversed the sale when it was sold to Dangote and Otedola and so on many years ago, and then the sale was reversed. I think it should have been privatized and it should have stayed in private hands, because when private sector involvement runs an enterprise, it's profit oriented. Nobody's going to sit back and watch his profit go down the drain. So there's an incentive to make sure the thing is working well. I don't hold out much hope that even if they get them up and running, that they will serve the country as well as private ones will do. But let's at least get them up and running. We've heard too many stories. There's been too much money thrown at them. We've been at this thing for years. Okay, so they said before the end of originally it was before the end of this year, before this December, I think Kaduna or one of them will start working. We are now hearing that before the end of 2024, some other ones will start working, and by the time they're all up and running, they'll be able to satisfy local demand and export. What they do, that's fantastic. If it happens that way, it's a good thing for Nigeria. But let's take it with a pinch of salt for now, and let's just continue to watch and see if the government can hold true. Because so many have tried in the past and failed. These refineries have been turnaround maintenance has been going on them since we returned to democracy in 1999. So this is 24 years of trying to get them up and running, and we've not so far succeeded. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a full-fledged, honest intention from the last administration and continuing with this one. There is an intense focus and desire and passion to get them up and running. And we can see that the government has the political will. But operationally, technologically, financially, is it feasible? Time will tell. So let's wait and see.
All right, moving on. Of course, another round of appointment, and the president has appointed 5 new aides to serve in the office of the president under the Media and Publicity Directorate. What are your thoughts, and what happened to cutting the cost of governance?
Yeah, well, yesterday's appointments got tongues wagging primarily because of the appearance of Fela Durotoye on that list. And people wondered how do you go from being a presidential candidate to becoming a media aide? And that's a fall from grace. But my position on that is if your intention is to truly serve, there's no ego involved. If you're coming to serve the people, there should be no ego involved, and you should be willing to serve at any level. So I admire the fact that he took the job. Some people see it as a step down, but I think that if it means his heart is in the right place and he has the interest of the people of Nigeria as his paramount objective. Now, the president seems to be appointing any and everybody every other week, every other day. We are appointing. We already have the largest cabinet in history. I think 48 ministers. He added a few more the other week in terms of special advisors, senior special assistants, various aides. The numbers seem to be growing, and yes. With each appointment, the costs of governance go up. And of course, we're all crying at the moment that government needs to cut costs so that the Nigerians that are, the everyday Nigerians that are sacrificing their well-being in terms of inflation and high costs, that they too will see that government is cutting its cloth. And is also making sacrifices. So it doesn't send the right message when government is getting bloated. At a time when we need to reduce the size of government, reduce government expenditure. If government was much smaller, I mean, the constitution mandates 36 ministers. If we kept it to that 36 and each one had 1 or 2 aides, the argument is that, well, the country is in such dire straits that you need hands-on, you need a lot of people hands-on in different sectors, and that if you have just a few people, they'll be overwhelmed by the amount of work there is to do. That's the justification from the administration. Is that our situation demands extraordinary, intensive, like being in the intensive care unit of the hospital, that it needs an all-hands-on-deck approach. And for that reason, they need to throw a lot of manpower at the problems. And look at, for example, in the previous immediate past administration, in their first term, former Lagos Governor Babatunde Fashola was given 3 ministries: power, works, and housing. After the first term, they took power away from him. Why? Because it was too much for him to cope with those 3. And those are 3 intense ministries. So they took power away from him and added another minister to handle power alone. So that gives you an idea of the fact that personnel and manpower is required to handle various sectors. So that's what the administration is using to justify the fact that all these appointments keep coming, because they are saying that there are critical areas of the economy that require attention, and they require individualized attention. They need specific people to focus on specific areas to get things up and running. Well, so it's opportunity cost. You have to weigh the two. The added cost of all the extra personnel, will it deliver benefits and dividends of democracy that outweigh the cost the added cost of having all these ministers. Well, I don't know, the jury is still out, we'll see. But of course, for the average Nigeria, it doesn't look too good, because what we want is smaller government, less expenses, so that there's more revenue to go across the masses for social services. Because of course, government expenditure is the largest part of the budget. Keeping the government running is what consumes the largest part of the budget. So if we can cut the cost of governance, it frees up money and makes more money available for social services for the masses. So if you want to look at it myopically, you will say, why should the cost of perhaps 2,000 people, maybe 10,000 people, by the time you count the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, that how many, even if you count all the civil servants that are in the government, they are still a fraction of the total population of the country. So a very few people are consuming a larger part of the resources. So either way you look at it, I guess the government is justified in its own argument that it needs this many people to get the country up and running again. And the masses are also justified in saying, we want you to cut the cost of governance, reduce size of government, so that there's more revenue to share among the social services for everybody.
All right, moving on. Now, the Minister of the FCT, that's Nyesom WIKE, has flagged the report of the European Union election observation mission, the 2023 general election, and he said that he has described it as inaccurate reflection of what transpired. According to him, the report did not give the true position of what happened in the last election, especially as it concerns the state, Rivers. What's your take?
Well, the first thing that bothered me was I didn't like the way he seemed to tongue lash the EU diplomat. I think that at certain levels, diplomacy requires some measure of courtesy, of dignity, you have to be a bit cultured. The way he spoke to that EU representative, he seemed to lash out. And I didn't particularly like the way he addressed that person. Nonetheless, yeah, you look at the EU, you look at the UN, and you look at all these bodies who come and give their opinion, and well, we accredited them to come and monitor the election because their presence validates their presence, and their report validates elections in the eyes of the international community. So we invited them. They didn't come on their own accord. We invited them to come and monitor the elections, and they did it within their ability, and they've released what they believe is an accurate, unbiased report. That doesn't mean we have to agree with it. After all, it's our election, and we are the ones who organize our thing, and the outcome it is us it affects. But nonetheless, I think that if we open the door to international validation, if we still have this sort of mentality that until foreign powers validate what we do, then we still don't feel like it passes the smell test or it passes muster until some colonial overlord somewhere validates it, then we open the door to this kind of thing happening. Why can we not have our own internal agencies be the ones to report on the outcome of the election? Although, of course, there will be allegations of bias, there will be allegations of partisanship and things like that, but you would expect an agency like the EU to at least be neutral. So, bottom line is this. I don't think an agency like the EU will make up or cook up figures or cook up conclusions. I think their report is based on what they observed. I think their report is supposed to be unbiased and supposed to be straightforward and unimpeachable. That's what I believe. Of course, Governor WIKE did not agree with it. He said, especially the aspect that they reported on Rivers, that was not what happened. Well, I guess he's in a position to know because he was governor of Rivers at that time. But nonetheless, these kind of reports, you look at them, you agree with some parts, you don't agree with other parts, and we all move on. Bottom line is, what are the lessons learned from the elections? I think, irrespective of what the EU said, all of us, from an infant to a blind person to even an elderly person who is senile already, all of us saw what happened during the elections, and many of us were dissatisfied. Many of us felt that the elections could have been conducted better. Many of us felt there were lapses. Many of us were out there on the streets to vote ourselves, and we saw lapses, and we blamed INEC for a lot. So I don't particularly think that any agency has to come and tell us what we already know and what we saw and what we participated in. So if Governor WIKE wants to continue to deny the obvious, I don't know what happened in Rivers. I wasn't there, but I know that in Lagos and the areas that I covered, there were lapses. That is the truth. So I don't dispute anything the EU said. Although, like I said, I can't talk about specific areas. There may have been lapses in Rivers, or maybe Rivers conducted. I can't see how there were lapses in Lagos and Rivers would have conducted a hitch-free elections, because lapses are systemic. The problems were systemic. The issues that plagued them in Lagos, IREV uploading the results electronically, it failed. Accrediting voters failed. Voter materials didn't arrive on time. They couldn't power the laptops. Various issues. Voter intimidation. Whatever happened in Lagos happened in Rivers, happened in Kano, happened in Kaduna, just to varying degrees. But there was no isolated incident in one place in Rivers that didn't happen in other places around the country. So I haven't read the EU report myself, but I did hear Governor WIKE complaining about it yesterday and rejecting it essentially, especially the part that alluded to the election in Rivers State. And so my final word on that simply is that at diplomatic levels, we ought to be a little more circumspect in our utterances. Also, as the minister of the FCT, I'm not sure he really had a right to be speaking for the government in that type of issue that's not relating to his portfolio. Maybe he was speaking in his capacity as ex-governor of Rivers State, I don't know. But it seems like he was speaking to that person on an official level, which really doesn't concern him. It has nothing to do with his current portfolio.
All right, let's touch on Israel-Gaza war. And according to reports, Israel has also declared a complete siege on the territory, saying that electricity, food, fuel, and water would be cut off. Also, the US has backed Israel with nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, as well as the UK has shown strong support for Israel, for the Israelis. What's your take?
Well, it's a humanitarian crisis in the making. Let's not even get too deep, because we don't have enough time to talk about the reasons or the background to the conflict itself. Let's just talk about this blockade and the fact that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank will be affected because Israel is threatening to cut off their water, cut off food supplies, cut off humanitarian aid, cut off water supply, cut off everything, and that they will continue their bombardment of the occupied territory to basically avenge what Hamas did in Israel on Saturday morning, and also to try and free their hostages. Well, Hamas is saying, look, listen, if you harm the hair on the head of any innocent Palestinian, we'll begin to kill your the hostages one by one. Now, that is a major problem. That's a major diplomatic impasse, because, of course, Israel does not want any of its citizens killed. And Israel puts such a value on the head of its citizens. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, Israel actually exchanged 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for one Israeli hostage. One. So they're basically saying the life of one Israeli is worth the life of 1,000 Palestinians. They exchanged 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for one Israeli hostage a few years ago. So I imagine that the 100 hostages, including military officers or senior military officers, are among the hostages. So I imagine Israel is really concerned about their well-being and their welfare and their lives, that Israel will do anything to keep them alive. So, but of course, the attack hit Israel in its very underbelly, and Israel is smarting and hurting from the massive loss of life. It says this kind of tragedy is of a magnitude that has never befallen it since 1948 when Israel was created. This is the worst possible. This is their own version of 9/11 and Pearl Harbor rolled into one, which means it's a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions for Israel. So the one thing that I want us to not forget, though, is that the attack was carried out by Hamas. Hamas is, well, of course, they've been labeled a terrorist group, but Hamas is not the Palestinian Authority. Yes, Hamas is a group of Palestinians who have constituted themselves into a resistance movement, into a militant force, to fight for the freedom of Palestinians, but they don't speak for all Palestinians, and they're not the authority in Palestine. So they are more or less like a political party, and they did this on their own, perhaps with backing from some people are saying backing from Iran. We don't know, although Iran has denied it yesterday. But it's not as if Palestine officially attacked Israel. That's not what happened. Hamas, on its own, as an individual entity, attacked Israel. So Israel's response has to be measured, because Israel cannot suddenly declare open war against all of Palestine, and what with innocent children, women, elderly, pregnant people, all that, who are innocent, don't know anything about, and have nothing to do with this attack. So I think probably by threatening the blockade of food and aid and electricity, Israel is probably trying to bring Palestine to its knees without necessarily having to use force, so that innocent people don't pay the ultimate price. So we'll see how it works. Hamas is standing strong and saying, we don't care what you do. We knew the possibilities of this type of response before we did what we did, and we don't care. So they are saying that we'll start to kill the hostages one by one with each step you take to try to contain or to try to revenge. So it's a very unfortunate situation, and we hope that the international community can get involved and have them start talking to each other. I mean, this conflict has been raging for years and for decades now, and there's continually been strife between the two of them. And I remember the Camp David Accords back in the day of Bill Clinton. There's continually been international effort to try and resolve this issue, and generally the way it works is it's been cast as a religious conflict, despite the fact that it isn't. So you find that so-called quote-unquote Christian countries support the Israeli side, and Israel is not even a Christian country; it's Jewish, And then you find that Muslim countries generally support the Palestinians, and so it's been cast as a religious conflict, but it really isn't, So it's really unfortunate, but either way, there are innocent human lives involved. Innocent human lives, elderly, women, children, innocent people, and it's unconscionable what's happening, and nobody's happy about it. And we hope the international community can get involved and find a way to bring about a ceasefire.
All right, let's take a look at Mr. and Mrs. before we go. And Mrs. is actually speaking this morning. She says, each time I ask for money to start the business I told you about, you give the harsh economic situation as an excuse. Can you prove that the harsh condition affects everybody? And then Mr. replies and says, go to the internet and see how they use the hashtag.
Okay, yeah. Well, Mr. Of course, he's feeling the pinch, as most men are. On easy lies the head that wears the crown. The economy is harsh. And of course, Mr. will always find ways of trying to make his point across that it's not easy for anybody at this point in time, irrespective. So go online and go and see how all this is happening to everybody out there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Tayo Akintobi, publisher of the Pages Today, Lekki and Keja Today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
Pleasure is all mine. Good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah. Also, remember to also like, share, and subscribe on all our social media platforms showing on your screen. To find out up-to-date stories, go to our website, www.vanguardngr.com, to find out more. I am Precious Chukudi, and thank you for watching.